I identify more as an artist than I do an entrepreneur. And business is simply my canvas. And for me, being in a space with other people it's a beautiful thing. Without a container, it feels like there's so much wasted love, energy, whatever, however you want to frame it, that just bleeds all over the place. Yeah. So to me, whenever I walk into any kind of group setting, I visualize like this container, and how can we set this container with intention and clear commitments as far as how do we show up for each other when we're, together. I mean, really at its core, container is designed to like make people feel safe, because you want people to feel safe so they can open up. And that's what makes a well-held container such a beautiful mechanism for transformation.
Hey everyone, Ronan here. The conversation you're about to listen to is between me and my friend Jayson Gaignard. Usually I try to use these introductions to help give you an understanding of who I'm speaking to and why. But when it comes to Jayson, all I'm going to say is this. He is, in my opinion, one of the best people on this planet, and my life is infinitely richer for his presence in it. And I know I'm not the only person who would make that testament. It is my sincere hope that you understand why I say this after listening to the following conversation, because if there is one gift I can give back to Jayson for all that he has consciously or unconsciously done for me, it is this. That he knows just how truly wonderful and cherished he is by me, and after listening to this episode, maybe even a little bit by you too. Thanks for listening. All right, well, Jayson, let's get started. I am so glad. I think I've been chasing you to come on the podcast for basically since I started the podcast, actually. I'm pretty sure you were one of the first people I said, come on the podcast. And you're like, yeah. And then it never happens and never happens. So first question is, why did you finally relent?
Honestly, so this is very weird to bring voice to, but I have no problem kind of doing so. I've said no to podcasts pretty extensively over the last year and change in order to cultivate space for the creative process. I find myself very much in a creative mode where I'm trying to produce at the moment. So trying to kind of clear my schedule as much as possible. In your case, if I'm being truthful, it's the caliber of some of your guests. I hold them in such high regard. And honestly, it was the Scott Galloway episode that when I saw you had a great conversation with Scott, and then you asked me to come on. I was like, listen, Scott and I are on different kind of level playing fields. But yeah, and honestly, I think we all have our growth edges when it comes to relationships. For some, it's having hard conversations. For others, it's showing up, authentically in conversation or in relationship. And for me, I even made the distinction last week. I was in Victoria, BC, and a friend of mine who's a billionaire reached out to me and he's like, hey, do you want to do coffee? And I didn't answer right away because in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, you're far too busy to have coffee with me. There's so much, demand on your time and that kind of stuff. And I sat with it and I'm like, this is very much my growth edge when it comes to relationships. I still have some challenges around kind of worthiness, so to speak. So all this to say, when invited to be on the show and just looking at some of the guests, and I've been on big podcasts before, but I think I hold you in such high regard that I'm like, I was thinking twice about it.
Well, thank you for the compliment. Thank you for the vulnerability there. Thank you for showing up today.
For sure.
And yes, I think I know I've told you this, but I'm going to share it with everybody here. It's like Jayson is, I completely understand struggling with sense of worthiness, but of all the people in the world, you are definitely probably amongst the top 3 favorite people in the world for me, because like you are just such a genuinely good human. I had Sanjay on the podcast a little while ago, and one of the insights I took away from that conversation, one of the principles or heuristics, as Sanjay used, is like spend time with people who consistently make your life better. Sanjay is one of those people, and Jayson, you're definitely one of those people for me. So while I respect your challenges with a sense of worthiness, from my lens, it's totally fucking insane, and you need to get over it because you are totally fucking worthy of every good thing that happens to you. So there you go.
Well, that's very kind of you.
End of conversation. I'm done. I'm out.
Another growth edge for me is receiving praise. So I'm getting better. I have a lot of growth edges, Ronan, but no, I definitely appreciate it. And it's funny because I always I love being a cheerleader to folks and seeing their greatness before they may see it in themselves. So I know that this is a thing that I'm kind of navigating. The key is awareness. And I catch myself in these patterns now. So I'm able to eventually turn the ship, which is why I'm here today.
Excellent. Beautiful. I'm happy to be a part of the ship turning. You know this because I've told this to you, and I'm not afraid to say it again. But for everybody listening, meeting Jayson was one of the sliding doors moments in my life, both personally and certainly professionally. So the backstory to meeting Jayson was we were both part of EO, and you were, I guess, the education coordinator or whatever it was on EO. And I guess you had started your own little spin-off mastermind with Alex Icon and UJ. And I got to know both of them, and they're like, you got to meet Jayson. And I met Jayson. And I guess Mastermind Talks number 2 was happening. And I think the cost then was like $5,000. And I didn't have $5,000 to spend on a 2 or 3 day workshop. Not workshop, that does a disservice to it, but conference at a community. I don't know what the proper word.
Life-changing experience. That's the way you frame that.
Experience. So, I reached out and we had a conversation. I said, hey, can I do some legal work for you in exchange for coming to the event? And you said yes. And I feel like I did not come close to doing anywhere close to $5,000 worth of legal work for you, but you actually let me come. And that event, besides meeting so many wonderful people, I can tell you that that moment was pivotal because you had us do an exercise, and I still have the book somewhere in our basement where we had to write out what we wanted to be doing. And at that time, I was juggling a whole bunch of potential opportunities, all of them kind of early stage. And I remember writing down, I think it was like a 90-day exercise, like in 90 days or 6 months, I want to be in the cannabis industry. I made the decision at that point in that moment in time, and I wrote it down. And then you sent that book to us subsequently a few weeks later, a couple months later, and that had happened. And, you've kind of followed my trajectory all along, but I was in the cannabis space. We started Cannabis RX, Canadian Cannabis Clinics, sold that to Aurora. That was my first real entrepreneurial success. That led to Field Trip and so much beyond. And so much of what Field Trip was able to become was through some of the people I met through Mastermind Talks, like Ben Greenfield and numerous and Tucker Max and all that kind of stuff. And so that moment still stands out to me, both the generosity of you inviting me to come, notwithstanding I was not a true paying client, and everything that's transpired since. It was because of that. So I want to start off by saying I'm genuinely grateful for that opportunity, and thank you.
Well, I love that we're starting off with a lot of warm and fuzzies. It's
don't worry, it's gonna get ugly.
Well, listen, I adore you. I adore you. We've been friends for over a decade now. And we've had a front row seat to, our evolution and transitions and all that kind of stuff. And I actually didn't know that workbook was instrumental to you. And it's weird. I mean, sometimes when people have a hesitancy to invest, to, joining a community or going to an event or whatever the case may be, I always point to Steve Jobs' quote that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You just need to trust that they'll somehow connect. And for me, I can connect the dots backwards on so many occasions when I leaned into something where I didn't have a tangible ROI for it. But as a result of the relationships, it just led to these magical things and doors that opened I could have never predicted. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I actually didn't know. I've known you all this time. I didn't know that was such an inflection point for you to some degree.
Hugely. It definitely was. All right. I know your story to some degree, but can you share your journey with us? You can start anywhere along the lines. But yeah, let's hear your story. Let's hear the Jayson story.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, I dropped out of high school. I wasn't much of an academic. And I started a service-based business, which was a personal concierge firm where our slogan was, if it was legal, moral, and would save you time, we'd take care of it. So I did everything from driving people's grandmothers to their old age home, to grocery shopping, to breaking up with people's girlfriends, literally knocking on a girl's door and say, hey, here's your stuff. Mark doesn't want to date you anymore. And as somebody, as I say this, as somebody who has historically a hard time with hard conversations, I would have actually definitely employed that service on numerous occasions, but did that event for a couple of years, that business for a couple of years. And through a mentor, I just had this really chance mentor kind of relationship that fell in my lap. I pivoted to a product business, basically an e-commerce business of sorts, which I grew to about $7 million a year over 4 years. And I was traveling the world, making a ton of money. With all that money and all that free time, I started to ask myself questions like, why am I here? Will I be remembered? How many people will show up to my funeral? And I was not happy with the answers I was giving myself. Actually had kidney complications at the age of 23 as a result of stress. So ultimately, just realized I built a business I hated to enable me to buy things I didn't need, to impress people I didn't like. And when I realized that I was out of alignment with the work that I was doing, and also what came in this time, which may be helpful, is I was driving my car one day, and I remember stopping at a set of lights and locking eyes with myself in the rearview mirror, and like hearing this voice deep within my being that your father never said he was proud of you. And I broke into tears. And I was like, where the hell did that come from? Because I felt like I had an okay relationship with my father. We were never really close. But I mean, he was in my life all my life and all that kind of stuff through my childhood. And I realized that was the unconscious driver pushing me to be successful, to make a ton of money, so that one day he'd say that he's proud of me. But the kicker was I was waiting for that day, and I was going to throw it back in his face and be like, told you so. So when I realized that I was running on dirty fuel, so to speak, I decided to scale the business down to zero. To sell the business would have been problematic, and it would have problematic in the sense it would have taken 2 to 3 years to position it for sale and some kind of earn out. And I just couldn't do it to myself. So I decided to scale the business down to zero. Unfortunately, 2 things happened that were beyond my control. Then landed me $250,000 in cash debt in August of 2012. On September 1st, my daughter turned 6 months old. On September 1st, I got married to my wife. So there's a saying that when one door closes, another one opens, but it sucks to be stuck in the hallway. It was a very dark hallway for me at the time. I struggled very much with being a first-time father and that kind of stuff, especially with all the added weight of the financial pressures. And a friend of mine posted on social media, again, getting back to not being able to connect the dots looking forward, an opportunity to go see Seth Godin in New York. He was facilitating a workshop. I didn't know what it was about. And Seth, anytime he puts anything out there to the world, they have these weird titles that you could never decipher what he's actually going to talk about. But went to this workshop, and it turns out the theme of it was the connection economy and how there's huge value connecting like-minded individuals. And at the time, I felt very isolated. I built my business not at the expense of any relationships, but I also didn't allocate any energy or bandwidth to cultivating relationships. So when I actually got married, I had 2 guys at my bachelor party. I had my brother and my brother-in-law. I knew nobody. So I made a commitment to myself on the plane ride home that I was going to do 2 mastermind dinners. That's the way I was going to kind of position them. And the goal was to bring 8 entrepreneurs for dinner with no other purpose than just to have them in this container and kind of see what happens. The first one I did, I almost canceled 2 hours prior because I'm like, nobody's going to see value in this. They're going to completely think I wasted their time. But given that it was 2 hours to showtime, I couldn't cancel it. And as people started to stroll in, I was just a mess. I was an anxious mess, but I stepped up when I needed to. And conversation didn't skip a beat for 4.5 hours. And I got clarity that being in proximity, because I don't like being the center of attention historically. I like being the fly on the wall. But to be in that room of all that energy and all those ideas and different industries, there was plenty of diversity. As far as thought and experiences and that kind of stuff, I realized it was something I want to do to some capacity for the rest of my life, and not as a business, because I was actually paying for these dinners out of pocket, and which was crazy at the time because I didn't know how I was going to make rent. I actually thought I was going to declare bankruptcy, which is why I could justify that the bank could take my car, they could take whatever measly assets I had left, but they couldn't take my relationships. Investing in myself and investing in my relationships was really the safest investment I could make. And then shortly after, only a few weeks later, I had an opportunity that fell in my lap to do an event with Tim Ferriss. And how that came to be was I had met Tim a year prior at an event that he did for authors. I never had the intention of ever becoming an author, but it was $10,000 to go for 2 days, which is 20x more than I've ever paid to go to an event. But I'm like, at 10 grand, there's bound to be some interesting people there. And that event for me was truly an inflection point. So he was coming out with a book called The 4-Hour Chef. And 3 weeks before launch, he found out he was going to be banned from all retail distribution. no Barnes & Noble, no Walmart, no Costco. And ultimately, he was the first big name author to publish through Amazon, and the traditional publishing world, which you know well, wanted to make an example out of him. So what he did was, and it was brilliant, he created this book bundle campaign that if you bought 5 books, you'd get an immersion blender. If you bought 50 books, maybe he'd do a webinar. Well, he had this Hail Mary package that he didn't think anybody would take, which was he'd do 2 speaking engagements if you bought 4,000 books. And I decided to, when I saw that, I actually thought of a mutual friend of ours who used to do these large events all across Canada. And I sent him an email. I said, listen, this is a great opportunity for you. The minute I click send, I said, you know what? I'm going to jump on this because he's only offering 1 package. And I know he's going to stay true to that. And if this guy doesn't take it, then I'll take it. And I sent an email to Tim and committed to buying the 4,000 books, which was $84,000. Problematic, again, because I can't pay rent. And what I did was I called 3, they were friends, but kind of acquaintances to some degree. They definitely weren't like deep friendships I have now. And I reached out to all 3 of them that morning. First one I reached out to said, sounds interesting. Share with me some numbers. And I was like, listen, dude, like I'll try, but I don't think in numbers and I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but let me loop back with you. The second person said, sounds great. Let's start a business together, 50-50, him and his business partner and me. And I said, that sounds really awesome. I have one more person to call. But the third person, I was halfway through my pitch and he said, just come to my office tomorrow to pick up the check. I didn't finish the pitch because I didn't want to give him any reason to say no. I just hung up that phone. The next morning, I think I was supposed to pick up that check at like 9 a.m. I think I showed up like 2 hours in advance waiting outside in case he changed his mind. I'd be like, dude, I'm already here. But he didn't change his mind. I got that check. I looked at it. I remember this little piece of paper, a single piece of paper check, but it felt like its weight in cash. It weighed a ton to me. And I went to the bank, deposited, wired the money to Tim, and we did our first event. I always say ignorance, confidence, and hard work can go a long way when you're an entrepreneur. I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't know how to put on an event. And as a result, it was actually much closer to a wedding than it was a conference because of the curation of those in attendance, because of the high touch nature of the assigned seating and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of magical things that happen at that first gathering, which gave me, the courage to do a second one, which is the one you kind of joined us at. Yep. But after that first event, when it was a big success, I reached back out to that friend who lent me the money. And I said, why did you lend this to me? We didn't even talk about repayment terms. Like we didn't even get that far in the conversation. And I'll never forget it. He said, I was investing in the business. I wasn't investing in the business. I was investing in you. And at that point, 2 things became very clear. One is you never know the value of your network or your relationships until you really need it. And 2, when you hit rock bottom in life, and we all hit rock bottom at some point, you'll be left with your word. So never tarnish your word and always invest in your relationships. And that set us off on this journey with MMT, where we've had over 19,000 entrepreneurs apply for a community that's capped at 150 people annually. I can dig into the ins and outs of MMT if you want, but that's obviously, you have pretty good insight as far as, the work that we do and the container that we hold all these beautiful relationships in. But this is the work I'm kind of deeply committed to for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So that's a bit of a snapshot.
That's awesome. Has your dad since ever said he's proud of you?
You've been holding on to that question all this time as I've been babbling? Wow, I feel so bad. What a terrible storyteller.
No, it's all important.
No. I got my first hug from my father 2 years ago when I was 37. So he's trying.
That's good.
The time is running out, but he's, the effort is there. Given the work that we've done on ourselves, we can have definitely deep empathy for what our parents have potentially navigated and what has shaped them. Any semblance of vulnerability is incredibly challenging for him. So I definitely feel like I have a good relationship with my father. I feel like I understand him deeply. And I feel like I've almost that strong need to have I'm proud of myself, and I wasn't before. And I think I think I needed that pride from him initially to potentially feel proud of myself. Now I don't need it so much anymore. I internally, I am enough. I've done enough in the world. I truly feel that. So that's as a result of just a lot of hard personal work. I'm glad you
You're getting there on the worthiness conversation. So for everyone listening, Jayson was also one of the people who was a participant in the never released Ordinary Trip / Everybody is Doing Drugs documentary. And when it was still called Ordinary Trip / Everybody is Doing Drugs, the big grand reveal, I guess, was the revelation that everybody has a story to wake up from. And we're all constantly waking up from the stories. And it was one of the big insights I took away. That is, there's nothing either good or bad. And the essence of being human is to imprint a narrative on every experience, good or bad. And so my question to you is, and I know there's a lot of aspects of it that make the story compelling, but looking back, at that 23, 24-year-old self who went through that serious situation of shutting down your business and realizing like no one would show up to your funeral and all that kind of stuff. Do you still think that's true? Or is that just a story you're telling yourself?
Oh, if I go back to that time period of my life?
Yeah. Like from the lens of now, Jayson now, looking at the 23-year-old, would you tell that 23-year-old that your perspective is accurate, that people don't care about you? Or was it just the story you were telling yourself as a 23-year-old that people don't care about you, but in fact they actually did?
That's a good question. The romantic side of me wants to be like, no, Jayson, that was a lie. People would show up. I don't think that's true. If I'm being honest with you. I mean, I didn't have much for relationships at the time. So yes, my mother would miss me and my father would miss me and my brother. There would be a very small circle. But that very much pales in comparison to the life I lead now.
Sure.
So I definitely think, I needed to climb that mountain of, chasing things that maybe were not as worthwhile as I thought they were, and only to achieve them and find out they were empty pursuits. So yeah, I'm sure people would have missed me. I don't remember how aggressive my narrative was around like, will I be remembered and all that kind of stuff. But the truth of the matter is I felt if I look at the greater landscape of my life at that point in time, it was very much focused on business and transactional business at that. And it was, I don't say it was irrelevant, but just at that age, I hadn't made much of an impact in the life of others through the work that I did, which again, I think is very different now. And so I still have deep empathy and love for Jayson of 23 and 24. And I think he did the best that he could with the tools that he had. But yeah.
Okay, that's fair. I don't know who wrote you the check for $84,000, but presumably that person had a lot of respect for you at that point too, though, right?
He did. Yeah. I smile because I've had 4 mentors that I've kicked out of MMT over the years. He's one of them. So it's interesting because obviously on some level I feel indebted to him for supporting and putting me on this journey. At the same time, being someone who holds a container for community, keeping that container as clean as possible that's paramount to me. So yeah, that's why I smile. But short answer, yeah, I'm sure he definitely saw something in me. Again, it was knowing what I know now. It's he does shoot from the hip a little bit in the best way possible. I'm glad he didn't think the decision through, because if he did, there's no reason whatsoever he should have given me that money. I was 27 years old, couldn't make rent. I was a failure, from a business perspective. So yeah, he didn't think too deeply about it, but I definitely believe he was definitely a good friend for a long period of time. And for me, that was definitely a vote of confidence from someone. I mean, to the power of belief. When somebody has belief in you and you don't have belief in yourself, I mean, eclipses even what money can do oftentimes. Even in the pandemic, that was reconfirmed for me in a very, very big way. So yeah.
Yeah, I think your point about when someone has faith in you it's huge. I recorded a podcast earlier today with a writer named Tom McGrath, and I asked him, and it's one of the questions I'm going to pose to you. Who have been the most important teachers in your life? And you don't have to answer that just yet, or you can. But one of the things he said was a teacher he had And it reminded me that the truth in the high school teacher, the truth is the same for me. His name was Richard Mall. He was my grade 13 OAC Canadian history teacher. And for the love of God, I don't remember a goddamn thing about Canadian history like any good Canadian. But I do remember how much passion he had for his students and how much faith he had, that they could do whatever they set their minds to, and how much he encouraged that in every one of his students. And it is absolutely fucking life-changing when you have someone do that for you, especially like your dad was not, I guess, the most tender or touchy-feely, vulnerable type father. My dad was absent, so I think we share similar experiences. And so when people do have faith in you, particularly men, it is really, really quite powerful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He was definitely present in flesh, but absent in spirit. But yeah, no, I mean, it's funny. I wish I could reflect back when you started talking about your teacher in high school. I had one teacher that I adored, and I put her on a pedestal. And then years after high school, I saw her at a trade show for something. And I was telling her I have a business now, all this kind of stuff. And she blurted out, "I didn't actually think you'd amount to anything." And I was like, "Oh, that's spicy. That's a hard one to sit with." So I don't have fond memories of teachers, but for me, any challenging relationship, I can look back with a sense of gratitude. There's a saying, make your tormentors your mentors. I've learned a lot. Some people's stories are examples while others are warnings. So, my father, I love him dearly, and I've adopted a lot of his positive traits like hard work and integrity and all that kind of stuff. But I've learned a lot from observing him or being in a relationship with him that I take as far as how I show up in the world and how I show up as a parent to my daughter. My mother has dealt with alcoholism for the last 40 years, and that just brings up a huge array of just everything to navigate that relationship accordingly. And that's taught me about boundaries, and which is something I've recently kind of cultivated, and I'm still working on. But even the relationship, my wife, I adore my wife. She means everything to me, but she's a strong woman. So I learn a lot about, just being in a relationship with someone like that. Usually somebody who can trigger you. Those are obviously things to have kind of on your awareness. I've definitely had beautiful mentors over the years, both like within my world who've made time and space to kind of guide me, and also been mentored by great books and those kind of things. So I could definitely share a laundry list of folks that have had a positive influence on my life. But even though more challenging relationships, one could argue they've probably shaped me more than anything else.
All right. Well, let's go into that. Can you name one, and what was the experience and what is the insight that you took away from it?
Yeah, I think my mother is probably the predominant one. If I could, definitely the one with the relationship with the hardest edges, one could say.
Sure.
And I mean, for what it's worth, I grew up in a rather chaotic household. And in order to keep the peace, I was very much a people pleaser. So that has been kind of just wired in my DNA at a young age. And ultimately, the turning point with my relationship with my mother was her drinking got progressively worse into my teens. And I remember when I was 16, going up into her bedroom and I was just fully open and vulnerable with her, and just said something along the lines of I'm here to be by your side to help you get help. We'll go to AA together. You're not in this alone, blah, blah, blah. And she couldn't come to terms that she had a problem. And at that point, it almost cauterized me emotionally as far as how vulnerable I was willing to go. I would never let someone have that level of leverage or impact on my emotional well-being. And I don't, I have a hard time saying this and not looking like a jerk, but I often share it was that moment that my mother died to me, and we've just been going through the motions ever since. Yeah. So it's been a challenging relationship kind of since, because there's been, just the notion of like, can you help somebody who doesn't want to be helped, and all these incidences, and valuing somebody who doesn't see value in their worth, to make a change. So that has been one of those relationships that has taught me a lot. And I also realized again that I, for many years, kept myself protected from being vulnerable as a result of that moment in that particular relationship. And it's taken me a long time to cultivate vulnerability again. I remember Christy Harold, who I was in a group kind of setting with her, and I give her a shout out all the time for this. It was hard as hell to hear in the moment, but we're in this group setting. We had known each other for a year or two, and we were doing some kind of exercise to kind of deepen relationships or deepen the intimacy of the group. And she turned to me and she's like, I feel like I don't know you. And I'm like, you've known me for 2 years. What are you talking about? Like, ask me a question. I'll answer the question, not knowing that like vulnerability isn't just like, responding to questions or what have you. And the reason I wasn't able to be vulnerable in relationships is because I couldn't just be vulnerable with myself. So I just completely cut off that side, as opposed to now I tend to be a pretty open book, tend to be somebody who taps into vulnerability kind of regularly. So it's taken a while for me to cultivate that again.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it certainly resonates with me. I remember, I wasn't vis-a-vis my mother, but I remember the exact moment when I cut myself off, being like, I'm not going to let anybody ever rock me that hard again. And just like, I'm going to be a ship that does not rock. I'll move slightly, but and you and I share like a great discomfort of dancing. And I remember in the making of the documentary, you talked about and tell me to shut up if you don't want this to,
No, I'm an open book. I can't just tell you I'm an open book and vulnerable and be like, no, too much.
No, you absolutely fucking can, man.
No,
that's
I'm
vulnerability,
totally fine with
but like, discomfort with dancing. Like I can dance if I'm drunk, but like being embodied like that, it's really fucking hard. And I think in the documentary, what came out, and I don't know if it came out during that or it was something that you were aware of, but how your mother handled her alcoholism or I guess the struggles of her life by like getting drunk and dancing in the hallways or in your house kind of thing. And that created a negative association, I guess, with that kind of physical expression.
And just being in my body. Like that, I've always had almost a resistance to that. So I can like do therapy and like talk things out. I'm brilliant at it. So that side of me has been well worked, so to speak. The actual like more like somatic and like, moving through things physically, I have such a hard resistance for. And it wasn't until that particular moment where, everybody was dancing or what have you, and I was somewhat enjoying it. And then I had this thing come up for me that the reason I have such a resistance to it, even though it feels right, the reason I have such a resistance to it is that was the vehicle that my mother used to use to just bear the pain that she was kind of navigating. So she would dance, and I could remember like almost like visually being in her proximity and just almost like feeling all of the pain leave her, and like almost felt like it was on to me. So for me, I made the association that like dancing or like physical movement or like using that as a vehicle to kind of process trauma or pain or whatever the case may be was not a good thing, because it's going to impact others. It's going to hurt others. And those kind of things. So, I made a handful of like really interesting connections like that when we were together. So it was definitely a beautiful experience in that regards. And just I still don't dance, but I started swimming. I took swimming classes,
Excellent.
which was as a result of this, of our time together, because I never learned how to swim. And I knew that was keeping me away from my relationship with my daughter, who is a fish in the water. So, that particular moment around using movement to move through some of those challenging things that we're all, holding on to and navigating. It was, I got clear understanding of why I had so much resistance to it.
Yeah. I'm going to share an observation that was about me, but I think there's so many parallels between our lives, and I think that came out a lot when we were in Costa Rica together. But
we both lost our hair. That's one commonality we share.
What's that?
I said we both are losing our hair. That's one commonality we share amongst many.
Absolutely. So my first ever intense psychedelic assisted therapy experience was a few years ago with a couple of therapists in Toronto. And I went in with the intention of trying to, use my voice, right? Like I've always struggled. I've always had like strong opinions weakly held. And so I went in and whatever, it was a great experience. I ended up singing at the top of my lungs, being like, fuck this, I can sing. I can't sing. I'm still a fucking terrible singer, but, and probably an equally terrible dancer. But like expression, finding a way to express myself and emotion has been a struggle my entire life. And, a couple of weeks ago, I was driving up to our farm and a song from the Bob Dylan 30th anniversary CD, which is now 30 years since that CD came out, which at the time fucking blows my mind. So, but anyway, song came on. It was like a Rolling Stone with John Cougar Mellencamp, and I don't remember the woman's name. But when the woman started singing, very Aretha Franklin kind of like soul depth kind of singing, like she just like started belting it out. And, if you listen to like a Rolling Stone for all its earnest, especially when it's musically expressed, it's a very powerful and emotional song. Like it really hits on a lot of themes that I think a lot of people can relate to. And in that moment, I'm like, fuck, my entire life, all I've wanted to do is be able to express like that woman in that moment, like that level of emotion coming out through my mouth or my voice. Like it was just like palpable. And it took me back to that psychedelic assisted therapy session a few years ago. And it's like, oh, I want to find my voice. Right. And here I am thinking like, fuck, all I want to do is find my voice. And I shared this with Stephanie, my wife, and kind of broke down quite a bit about it. Because it's still palpable for me. And in talking about it subsequently, it's really interesting. Erwin, my teacher, says your name is your destiny. Somewhere in your name is your destiny. And so a couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with Erwin, and I'm like, holy shit, my name in Hebrew, Ronan, means joyous song, right? And I'm like, holy shit, like that shit doesn't come up like just randomly. Like you can't help but appreciate the coherence of it all when I adopt a name like Ronan, and my seemingly lifelong struggle has been expressing myself, lyrically. And just a couple of days ago, Jordan Boxer, a guy I work with, we're talking about some spiritual stuff, and he's like, I feel like, Ronan, like you're right at the cusp of like evolving, but there's something right here holding you back in your throat. And I'm like, Jesus, dude, you're absolutely right. And I told him about the song and the psychedelic therapy session and all that kind of stuff. And just listening to you talk and the way you talk, I feel like, I don't know, does that resonate with you at all, that there's still a piece of you that needs to be expressed? Like I almost hear it in the way you talk, but I'm curious to know if it resonates with you.
Well, now I'm concerned. I guess so. I thought I had no blockages whatsoever. As I clear my throat. No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm deeply committed to the personal work for the rest of my life. And if I'm lucky, that's another, 30, 40, 50 years. So I never feel like I arrived, so to speak. So I'm consistently just trying to lean into, who I am and unbecome everything I'm not, leaning into my voice. I mean, even recently, my wife observed me say no to something. This is a very new territory for me to start saying no to things as a people pleaser historically, and like that is something I'm kind of exercising that voice to some degree, because I even as I look back on my childhood, like I would never voice my needs. They were always third, fourth, fifth down the rung of importance, and I also didn't even know what I wanted, because I was never in a position where, I was given the opportunity to voice my needs. It didn't matter when I was young, like this is what we're doing, or this is where we're going, or this is what you're doing this weekend, or whatever the case may be. So, I definitely appreciate that share. I can definitely see myself in some of it for sure. I just, I have a lack of awareness as far as what is that what is continuing those blockages. But I feel like an iceberg, it's slowly melting away over time, and I just trust in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you probably shared the most important insight I've come across in a long time, which is like, there is no arriving. It's just an ongoing journey, right? And the moment you let go of that, there being some sort of destination, the easier all of this work becomes, I think.
100%. Yeah. Anybody I know who is has an ounce of humility and has done this work for some time, definitely subscribes to the idea of like, we don't have it all figured out. Because I think there's definitely times in my life where I felt like I had it all figured out. Maybe I did medicine work or had a great conversation or something like that. I'm like, I got it. And you're like, no, there's layers. And that's truly the way I look at my development, is like layers of an onion. I'm just slowly peeling away the layers, time over time. So, yeah, maybe by the time I reach my deathbed, I'll get to the core of that onion, so to speak. But I just think it's exactly, yeah. Maybe I'll find a different analogy. What else has layers to it? I don't even know. But yeah, no, I mean, I definitely am subscribed to this work forever. And it's uncomfortable too, because every time you have some of these moments, you work through something, you're like, oh man, I feel like I'm good. I just want to like stabilize a little bit. And it's easy almost to like beat yourself up and go too aggressively into this work as well.
Yeah.
But I think I found a cadence that kind of works for me, and different modalities that work for me. Deeply committed to this work.
Awesome. When you were talking about MMT before, you were talking about creating a container, and that's a word that gets thrown around quite a bit, especially in the personal growth kind of space. What does it mean to you, and how do you create that container for MMT? Obviously, I think just who you are goes a long way, because I think your integrity is at the very forefront of who you are. But what else goes into creating that container?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I haven't flushed it out like through the written word yet. So I don't have like, here's the 5 components that make an incredible container. I know if I riff on it, it'll come out. But I mean, for me, I was just actually at an event this last week. And it was interesting to be on the other side of things, because it's an opportunity I rarely have.
Right.
And literally, like I always say that I identify more as an artist than I do an entrepreneur. And business is simply my canvas. And for me, being in a space with other people it's a beautiful thing. It's a canvas. And they're like, without a container, it feels like there's so much wasted love, energy, whatever, however you want to frame it, that just bleeds all over the place.
Yeah.
So to me, whenever I walk into any kind of group setting, I visualize like this container, and how can we set this container with intention and clear commitments as far as how do we show up for each other when we're, together. And then really, truly like protecting that container. So holding, everyone in that container to a standard, whether that be confidentiality. I mean, really at its core, container is designed to like make people feel safe, because you want people to feel safe so they can open up. And that's what makes a well-held container such a beautiful mechanism for transformation. So for me, when I look at it from like an event scenario, at the beginning of our events, like first, I'm very selective as far as who comes. Yeah. The value of a community is often like those who are not included. So there's generally, a very strong sense of shared values and that kind of stuff as far as when people are together. Then at the beginning, I always set almost like the why behind what we're doing, why we're together, and just really put a lot of intention into that, because it's also not just the container, it's also getting people to fly in formation with that vision or what have you. And then having very clear, we call them guiding principles at MMT, but have very clear commitments as far as how we show up when we're together. And also a closing of the container. And that's top of mind for me, because to me, it's like you close it with everybody in it, and then I guess you reopen it. One could say at the end, but there has to be almost like this closing exercise of sorts. And I share that because I just went to an event where there was no close, and it was kind of jarring. It was a beautiful experience that we shared together, but then it was just nothing happened at the end. There was no like sharing of appreciation or whatever the case may be, or just reflection over our time together. And as a result, like I actually had a few conversations with some of the other attendees, and they're like, yeah, the end felt kind of jarring to me, which is the best way to kind of describe it. So that's the way we kind of look, I guess, at a container from a high level when it comes to MMT. But I think a lot of those principles can be applied in different scenarios. But ultimately for me, whenever I see a group of humans, I try to figure out how can I make them feel safe and how can I get them to fly in formation.
It's great advice. Very good. I think that's important, like not just in like the business context, but everywhere, right? Like if you can walk into a room at any given time and help that come to fruition, what a powerful skill, what a powerful gift to offer to the world. So I think that's a lot of wisdom and insight in that. Thank you. You, like another MMTer, Laura Gassner-Otting, violated your no podcast rule. I don't know how hard and fast yours is, but to join here, you've published at least one book, Community Made. Can you tell us about that book, and can you tell us what the creative bubble that you've now contained in your geodesic dome is being put towards?
Yeah, well, it just occurred to me the geodesic dome is circular, so it's like a container where I feel safe to explore my ideas and that kind of stuff. So I actually wrote a book called Mastermind Dinners in 2014, right? Which was a book I wrote quickly and has done well by like book standards. It has like over 700 reviews on Amazon and has sold some 50,000 copies. But it's a book that I'm not necessarily proud of. The principles still ring true and all that kind of stuff, but I know I didn't put my all into that book. So I share that because that's been gnawing away at me for the last like 7 years. If I go to speak at an event and they're like, oh, we bought 50 copies of your book, I'm like, that burns. I wish you did buy that book. But again, I've reread it recently because I had this narrative of like, oh, this thing is trash. I should take this off the market. And I reread it. I'm like, it's actually not that bad. I just would, revamp it a lot. So for me, the last year, I keep mortality at just like the forefront of my decision-making process. When I was 18, I actually was a mechanic. So I dropped out of high school, became a mechanic. And one day when I was working on a vehicle, I remember being at this like wash basin and I blew my nose and it was black. And that was as a result of like the brake dust that I was inhaling. And I looked over to the owner who was on my right-hand side and he was holding his elbow at that perfectly timed moment because he was getting carpal tunnel as a result of the impact guns. And that day at lunch, I decided to look up the average age of, I guess, mortality of like a North American male, which is like 79 years. And I decided to multiply that by 365 days, which gave me, I think it was 29,270 days. Being 18 at the time, I multiplied that by 365 days, and I realized I'd lived 6,500 out of my 27,000 days, if I'm lucky, if I make it to that, that average mortality range. And for me, it just created a sense of urgency that I'm not going to be here forever, and I can literally see the days ticking. And I actually quit being a mechanic that day, and I didn't know what I was going to do next, and that ultimately led me into business and all that kind of stuff. All this to say, I very much keep mortality at the forefront of my decision process. And I fast forward to like, I'm on my deathbed. What regrets do I have? And how can I mitigate those by taking action now? And for me, as I kind of alluded to earlier, like I feel like I am enough and I've done enough in the world that like I kind of check those boxes to some degree. But the one regret I would have on my deathbed is if I didn't take the time to metabolize everything I've learned the hard way over the last decade that I know can support others on their journey. I don't feel like I could deal with that regret. I've been an incredible father to my daughter. Ask my wife. I'm a phenomenal husband. I know I've made an impact through MMT and all that kind of stuff, but that's the one thing that really just gnaws at me. So as a result, we decided to not do an event for MMT in 2024, which ultimately cost us like $1.8 million, which is not chump change because we're just coming out of the pandemic where our business was decimated. Yeah. So we're climbing out of debt. So to make that decision was not easy, but it was the right decision to create space for the creative process effectively. So again, trying to say no to as much as possible so I can kind of honor this space. And I find myself kind of deep in the writing process right now. It's been, I don't know, people say, I was thinking about this morning, people say like writing is hard. It is to some degree, but like being broke is far harder than writing a book. I've gone through some hard things in my life, so I've tried not to like label writing a book as hard. It's a puzzle for sure. Like you run into contradictions and these kind of things. Like these are things that need to be figured out, but that's also they get figured out with time and focus and those kind of things. So for me, I've only had one bad writing day out of the last 115. And that one bad writing day was just because I didn't want to sit down in front of a computer. I actually journaled about it and I posted it on social media. I'm like, I literally don't want to sit down because something is happening in me emotionally that I just don't want to sit with. So it had nothing to do with the book, but that was keeping me from kind of leaning into the creative process. Outside of that, I mean, I have days where I produce a little more than others, but it's been a beautifully just therapeutic, experience for me. And I'm very confident that writing will be a part of my life for the rest of my life. And it's easy to put by the wayside because it's so interesting to work on something that won't be released for 2 years. So it's like ultimate delayed gratification in a culture that like this is not normal anymore. Normally you post something on TikTok and you watch the likes or whatever the case may be. But there is something about just the deep work that goes into writing a book. The 10,000 hours of experience, far more than that, but 10,000 hours of experience and 1,000 hours or so to take to write the book and go through the editing process, all to be able to hand to somebody else that they can consume in only a few hours. So, I was kind of joking with somebody recently that like, I want to live on like a shelf and not as an urn, but like between like two hardcover pages, like everything I learned the hard way, to again, hopefully support somebody else on their journey. So I'll just say it's going well. It's taking longer than anticipated, but it's been a just beautifully therapeutic process for me.
That's beautiful. What a great way to write. Not just to like get your ideas out, but to metabolize things. That's such a great way to be doing.
Well, I thought I knew what I was talking about until I started like putting pen to paper, and I was like, man, I got to think deeper about these things, or what have you. And I think James Clear had a quote, something along the lines of like, I hope everybody writes a book because like it changes you. And it's been one of the best personal development vehicles because it's brought so much clarity to my thinking. And then one of the nice things about it too, why it's been such an enjoyable experience for me is I'm not working with a traditional publisher. I'm working with a hybrid publisher where I have the ability to control the timelines. This would be a very different process for me if I had, 6 weeks to write a book.
Yeah.
I don't have those constraints. So as a result, I get to like go down different rabbit holes when I feel called to and, see things through different perspectives and have conversations and those kind of things, which is, again, it's not rushed and it's beautiful for that reason. It's going well. And, I make a commitment to kind of focus 2 hours a day on it, as opposed to like a word count or what have you, because I'm not trying to write the longest book in the world. I'm trying to write the best book I can. So if I spend that 2 hours, focused on a single sentence that's driving me bananas, so be it. If I spend that 2 hours and I produce 2,000 words, that's amazing as well. It's all for, in the spirit of putting something out there to the world that I'm proud of.
Do you have a strict kind of like 2 hour window? Is it from like 8 to 10 or is it just 2 hours a day at any point?
Yeah, so historically it's first thing when I wake up. Right. I've come to realize I can do anything I want. I can achieve anything I want in the first like 2 hours of the day. The problem is knowing that is so powerful for me that I have like competing priorities. I'm like, I want to lose weight. So like I got to, squeeze that in that 2 hours. But no, I also want to write the book. Then I got to do that in the 2 hours. Or I have these things lagging in the business. I got to slot it in that 2 hours. To me, waking up as early as I do, those first 2 hours are uninterrupted. That's like my time. So that's before my daughter wakes up. That's before my wife, wakes up. That's before I start getting emails or, Slack messages or whatever the case may be. So I'm setting myself up for success if I roll out of bed and like start working on that. Again, I know that if I didn't have the book, like that is very precious time to actually achieve things. So if health and wellness and fitness was like my biggest focus, like I would slot it in that time slot. So that's just a habit and ritual that I've kind of cultivated that has worked really, really well for me. I'll get pockets where maybe I can try to work on the book in the evening or whatever the case may be. But for me, first 2 hours of the morning is critical, at least to like set myself up for success in the sense that like I'm going to deliver on what I want to.
That's awesome. I noticed on Instagram recently that you posted something about being punked. Tell.
You want to hear about it? Is that what you said? Oh, shoot. Oh, God. It's funny. Where do I begin? So the rule of thumb is like bad things happen in threes. I think after like 8 things in this week, I stopped counting and it became humorous. So short version, I decided to surprise my family to take them to Montreal for the weekend. And the first night my truck got stolen, which was a brand new truck. And then, I had all kinds of hoops to jump through to get a rental car and that kind of stuff. Then I found out that my credit card was compromised to be expected because my credit card was in the truck. But then I realized that somebody had actually stole my identity and opened credit cards under my name and trashed my credit score over the last 6 months. And this is like the longest 6-month span I haven't looked at my credit score. That happened. I came back home. There was a slow thing. It was nonstop. Oh, I'm building this like 63-foot pergola. I have this rule on our farm that I have to do everything on my own. So we have this 57-acre farm, and I try not to hire out work because that's what keeps my finances in check. If I had the ability to start writing checks, I'd be broke in no time. So the constraint is I have to do the work. All this to say I'm building this 63-foot pergola. And I poured all these like concrete things, the footings and all that kind of stuff. We had the worst rainstorm of all time where it actually washed out our gardens, which is thing number 6. So I planted all this stuff. It was all washed out by the rain, but we had so much rain that the concrete piles were floating. They were bobbing like buoys in the middle of the ocean, in their holes. And we're doing this for a dinner that we're doing on August 24th. So it's a race against the clock. I bought grass seed to lay for this thing. And, on the grass seed container, it said it'll take 28 days to germinate. And then I looked and our dinner's in 31 days. We have friends flying in from all over the world for this dinner. So I'm like, I'm going to have to put AstroTurf. The list goes on and on, but I have my health. My family has their health. And yeah, it was one of those moments where there was a point I just looked over my shoulder. I'm like, there has to be a camera on me right now. This makes no sense that so much is going sideways in such a short period of time. So I can go on, but that was a little snippet of my week.
Beauty. Thank you for sharing. And you're still smiling, which is all that matters, because I probably would have put a hole through my computer screen if that was my week right now.
No, my computer's in good standing, but there comes a point where you're almost you're forced to laugh. So it was one of those weeks.
You kind of touched on it, but who was the most influential teacher in your life? You talked about, metabolizing some of those tormentors becoming mentors. Doesn't have to be that, but is there one thing that stands out as being like that was the single most pivotal lesson I've ever had?
Yeah, I'd be lying to pinpoint like one singular person. I could even friends and folks like you, like I can point to hundreds of lessons and thousands of lessons that have been compounded by just watching people, how they show up in the world and those kind of things. So it's hard. I think a lot of the aha moments of awareness I've cultivated on my own. Usually with the support of plant-based medicines and like a therapeutic, a very like structured therapeutic environment. So one could say like they have been guides for me in those moments, so to speak, but like these are things that like they come on my awareness and they just cut to the core of like so many problems that just weren't on my radar. So when I look at like the big aha moments of learning, it's usually as a result of those, identifying those triggers or just unearthing things. And those usually happen as like just a solitary endeavor. But yeah, I mean, I've had so many mentors, and so many, and it's so weird. I mean, to me, if I had to probably look at like an inflection point, it would probably be Tony Robbins back when I was 18. I had never been exposed to any kind of personal development stuff. And I went to a Tony Robbins event. And I mean, there's some of his concepts specifically around like ownership and not being a victim and those kind of things that gave me the agency that like I could change things, which was very empowering at 18 years old. I don't know if I had that embedded in me earlier than that, but I truly see that like Tony Robbins event as an inflection point, and the importance of like being very conscious as far as like your peer group and that kind of stuff. So I had that incident with my mother when I was 16, 18. Tony Robbins said, "Hey, take ownership, be, very conscious as far as who you're surrounding yourself with, and your life will get better." And, from 18 to today, I'm just very, very conscious as far as, the people in my world. And that has led to so many incredible things. But if I had to point to an inflection point, it would be him. But I've had so many, checkpoints along the way as a result of just friendships and mentors and books I've read and podcasts I've listened to that have just incrementally kind of shifted me on my journey.
Cool. That's a great answer. And listen, I think that's true. It's like there's tons and tons of teachers. I was just wondering if anyone in particular stood out. And it's funny because as you were talking about plant medicine, I was going to ask, I think for a lot of people, taking that leap into personal growth is a huge leap. The first time you're like, all right, I'm going to put down my guard and try something. And so I was going to ask you, when was the first time you put down your guard to try plant medicine? But the truth is that question's irrelevant, because I think it's probably at that time you went to Tony Robbins and opened yourself up to a different perspective that started that journey, it sounds like.
Yeah. I definitely think Tony Robbins was an inflection point to me, because after that is when I started to join things like Rotary Club and EO and those, again, that was the inflection. And then there was little things that happened along the way. And plant-based medicine has, thrown me even more aggressively on that curve, one could say. The first experience wasn't particularly, it was the least therapeutic experience I had. And I didn't know what I was kind of going into. There was ignorance there. But after that experience, I realized there was something more. And I also understood the value of these tools when they're used effectively. And since that point, it's all been very, thoughtful, intentional, with very strong integration, very lot of intention on the front end, and then very strong integration on the back end. And that has continued to, again, just pay huge dividends in my life.
Awesome. Looking back on your life, what was the one thing growing up that you wanted more than anything? Because I think one of the things that a lot of people get trapped into is like having a dream and sticking to it and not letting maturity and wisdom and experience help you realize that maybe it's time to change your perspective on goals and ambitions.
And what was the question again? I just want to make sure I got it right.
What was the one thing growing up you wanted more than anything?
If I'm being honest, what comes to mind first was belonging.
Yeah.
To be protected, to be cared for. And these are all things, no surprise, I try to provide to others at scale.
Yeah.
I think those are three deep ones.
Sure.
Belonging, care, and protection.
Yeah. For me, like looking back, I was always very teleological. I was always focused on the next step, like high school, university, law school, get the job, get the house, get the wife, get the kids, get the car.
Sure.
Boom. And like, okay, that's happiness. And for me, like the realization is like, there's happiness steps along the way and they give you little bursts of happiness. But I think all along I was just trying to, going back to the conversation of worthiness, just like trying to prove that I was worthy, that I was capable, that I was good enough, and those were the metrics that I put in place, only to realize somewhere over the last, 20 years that none of those things will actually give you a sense of worthiness. And that only comes from within.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Kind of touched on it a little bit, but what dreams do you have for the rest of your life? I find as we get older and we achieve a lot of the things that we set out to achieve, we stop dreaming and we stop hoping for something in the future. And I know, writing books, and I know you've got the current book and probably at least one other in mind, but are there any other dreams that stand out as what you want to achieve going forward?
Yeah. I live a pretty dope life that I've been trying to cultivate for the last 11 years. Like, I have beautiful friendships and relationships. I do meaningful work. I live in my little slice of paradise. At 11, it was 11 or 12 years ago when I left that last business and was broke. One of the exercises I did was identifying my perfect day. What time do I wake up? Who do I wake up next to? What are the emotions I want to feel throughout the day? Am I working on, remotely with a team, or am I, an artist and work alone? Am I going into an office? And honestly, on most days, and I may not always appreciate it, but on most days, I live that perfect day that I designed kind of 12 years ago. For me, again, writing is forever going to be, I think, a part of my writing. I don't want to be so attached to the medium. Metabolizing things I've learned the hard way and giving them purpose and meaning and sending the elevator back down, that is going to be a part of my life forever. One of the best vehicles for that is writing. So that is definitely my intention to lean into it. But honestly, what also came up for me is I want to see my daughter fall in love. I don't know. There's something about, I feel like I can check out at that point if I had to. But just seeing that for her and seeing her navigate that and everything that comes, with that package, so to speak. So, because outside of that, vacations with my wife and a slew of other little things in between. But as long as I'm here, I want to, send the elevator back down and support others on their journey. And I want to make sure my daughter's okay. And I know she is. She's an incredible girl and that kind of stuff. But just for some reason, seeing her fall in love is a checkpoint I want to experience. And then I can't think really beyond that, if I'm being honest.
Oh, that's great. I love the analogy of sending the elevator back down. I think that's a beautiful concept of, you recently organized an event with Chip Conley, who, as a result of that, I've got coming on the podcast a couple of weeks.
Oh, snap. I love it. I love it.
So I'll give you props when that happens. But
please do. My ego would love it.
Done and doner. But like how we talked about, you're a little bit younger than I am, but around this point, you go from the accumulation phase to the editing phase and starting to shed all the things that don't matter. And it sounds like you're well on your way to doing that, which is awesome, and I think serves as an inspiration for hopefully everybody listening.
Well, that's very kind of you. I'm a companion on the path. I don't have everything figured out, but in some regards, I'm further along than most, and there's definitely some people that I still look to as I try to figure out this messy thing called life. So, no, I definitely, I appreciate it. It's just reflecting on what I said about my daughter. It's actually hitting me more than I thought it would. So, thank you for the little thought exercise.
My pleasure. Last question for you, and then I'll send you back to writing or farming or whatever the case may be.
Take care of my animals.
2 questions. What was the last thing that blew your mind? And I'll ask the second question, which is, what's one thing you wish more people knew?
Oh, Jesus. Last thing you blew my mind.
Not easy questions, man. I come in hard hitting.
No, you should have sent this in prep. You said no prep. These are deep questions. Last thing that blew my mind. Honestly, I hate to bring it back to my daughter, but it's true. There's an element of the most rewarding thing I do is metabolize my learnings and coach her as she navigates, her early teen years and all that kind of stuff. And seeing a kid have a challenge, take your guidance and apply it and achieve a different result, I'm done. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that is the most rewarding thing in the world. So to me, like, that, those moments draw more awe and amazement than anything else. I'm sure there could be a different, better answer, but I have horrible memory, which actually works really good because I'm almost always living either in the moment or in the future. I don't think about the past because I can't remember the past. So yeah, that wasn't necessarily a great question for somebody like me, but that is, the comment of my daughter is very true. And the other question was, what should something everyone should know?
What's one thing you wish more people knew?
I think that it gets better.
Huh.
I've been lucky enough to be a confidant of sorts to many friends as they navigate the highs and lows of, I was going to say entrepreneurship, but just life in general. We all have our highs and lows. And the one thing I've come to realize is, thinking back to Shakespeare, there's no good or bad thing. He makes it so, first and foremost. But the good times don't last forever. And the bad times don't last forever either. And I've had some very dark, bad times where I could not see my way out of it, where I just focused on putting one foot ahead of the other. Yeah, I've had many moments like that. And I think somebody asked me years ago, not even that long ago, and some people have asked me a variation of this question of like, what would your older self tell like your current present self? Yeah. And the thing that always comes up is everything's going to be okay. Yeah. Like just that sense of like faith is something that is new territory for me. And I think it's also lacking in our society just culturally with just the decline in people subscribing to a religion or what have you. Because usually there's some kind of faith kind of baked into that. And I didn't grow up. I grew up a Christian, but not really somebody who practiced. So just embracing that faith that like everything's going to be okay. The most aggressive storms usually pass the fastest and that kind of stuff. So for me, just it reminds me of a saying from a friend of mine who's a very well-known entrepreneur. His mantra was just stay in the game. As long as you stay in the game, you're going to win. So you don't have to have these big, wins all the time and that kind of stuff. Just stay in the game. And when I look back on my darkest times, just remembering that, like, yeah, stay in the game. The bad doesn't last forever. And that'd be a message I would try to leave with everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Through the darkest times. And here you are in your geodesic dome. What a great way to close off. That's all I got, buddy. That was exactly what I hoped it would be. Thank you so much for showing up physically, showing up spiritually and emotionally. I love this conversation, and I look forward to hopefully having many, many more, including certainly not waiting till then, but whenever your book comes out, I hope you'll come back and drop all those metabolized nuggets of wisdom on us, which sounds a little bit grosser than it should, but...
Well, listen, my man, I appreciate you immensely as a dear, dear friend. And thank you for the nudge to get me on the podcast. And, thank you for the work that you're putting out to the world through this podcast. I mean, obviously, something like this is a labor of love. There's other things that could be, occupying this time and energy of yours. And you're choosing to send the elevator back down, as am I. So we're companions on the path in that regard. So I appreciate you immensely.
Awesome.
Hey, podcast people, don't leave yet. This is your favorite podcast producer, Chris. And after we recorded this episode, I stuck around to reflect and ask Ronan some questions about the interview.
This podcast is already getting long, but I just thought I would ask you, what's the last thing that blew your mind, Ronan?
That's a fair question. And I was anticipating it may get thrown back at me. So I was thinking about it while talking to Jayson. And truthfully, it was what I mentioned, that realization that your name is your destiny. And when I realized that my name means joyous song, and so much of my journey has been about trying to find and express my voice, I was just like, you can't make that shit up. Like, it's just the level of coincidence that would be required to make that true is just mind-blowing. That, it gives real sense to the fact that there is something happening on a different level. I don't know if I'd call it God or what, but there's got to be something operating in the background somehow. And it was just so eye-opening to see it, so put in my face in such a consistent order, and particularly when Jordan subsequently, called me out and said, like, there's something here that's blocking your karma, or your energy. And I'm like, fuck, how would you know that other than to actually see it, which means all of that storyline must be connected and seen somewhere. So
it felt very like meta to me that we're having this conversation about throat chakra blockages while doing a podcast.
Totally. What about you?
But also, well, it reminded me, I just wanted to say though, that whole thing reminded me of an experience I had as you guys were kind of talking about how the work is never done, or he said, you never hit an arrival point. Exactly. Yeah. A long time ago, like a decade ago, I saw a medicine woman shaman named Carrie Hummingbird here in Austin.
Okay.
And she walked me through an experience that was completely sober. It was more kind of visualization and breath work. And she was talking to me about a throat chakra blockage.
Huh.
And as we were working together, I could feel like my Adam's apple getting like warmer and warmer and warmer to the point it was like burning hot. And it was an emotional day of someone who had like kind of stifled myself from voicing my opinions. And yet, as you were talking with Jayson, I couldn't help but think that was a very impactful experience that I'll never forget. And yet, 6 months, 12 months afterwards, kind of hard not to just like feel back to normal, like back to my normal self. Like we do these things, we do these retreats and these plant medicine experiences, and we work with shamans. And it does feel like the work is never done. That was actually a podcast title I was thinking of, is Doing the Work is Never Done with Jayson Gaignard. But then the marketer in me goes like, is that clickable? Do people want to listen to a podcast about doing the work? I don't know. But that little anecdote came up to me for me as you guys were talking, as like just how impactful that was, but also how we have these peak experiences and then we kind of just get back in our normal groove. Sometimes that's like has to just keep going on to the next thing.
Yeah, I think, the way I describe psychedelic experiences is like, it's like an elastic band. It gets stretched and you have the peak experience and it lasts for a little while. And then it goes back largely into shape, but not exactly the same. It's been changed. It's been stretched. And the trajectory is now different. What you can do with that elastic band is now different than it was before that moment. And it's just a reminder to, have compassion, stay the course, and realize it's an ongoing effort, and that you let go of the arrivals and enjoy the process. And like Sanjay said, make sure you do it with good people.
Yeah. So let me put on my therapist hat for 1 second. Flip one more question back at you, which is, Ronan, what did you want most growing up? And does it also manifest these desires like in your own work, in your career trajectory?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned that to Jayson, which is like I wanted to like get the degree, go to law school, get the job, marry a beautiful woman, get the house, like do all the things that we're told to do, because somehow I thought, my sense of like worth would come from that I would be good enough if I had done those things. Listen, I always wanted to be a NBA player and like a Major League Baseball player. I always wanted to be an athlete. I wanted to be a musician, all of these things. Those were all dreams, but really like the goal was to prove myself through those steps, to hopefully find worth. And I've achieved all those things. In fact, I've written a couple of new potential, 30-second clips for the podcast. And that's a theme of one of them. So I'm going to take some time to record that and I'll send that over to you. And we can go from there. But that was it for me. What about you?
That's right. I had to Google teleological at this point in the conversation. as coming from, it's, I don't know, a worldview in which we're focused on things for their end purpose.
Yep.
Is one way to look at that. And it's funny to me, it's like, isn't that just kind of like maleness? Isn't that just like the guy experience? I can't help but think like how much society shapes men specifically to say that your value as a human being and your love comes from being productive and doing things.
Yep.
So that's a big, you wonder how much of that is biology versus how much of that is culture.
I mean, I think culture drives biology, right? Like, I think our culture selects for that. And so the people whose genetics reflect that, tend to be more successful. So I think it's a bit of both. But it's certainly, our society turns women into sex objects and men into performance objects. And I think that's one of the things that we need to start to unpack quite a bit and let people just be who they are for the sake of being instead of what they can do.
Yeah, definitely. Or how sexy they can look.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I was thinking about this as I was what I wanted most growing up, listening to the conversation. And what's funny, what comes up for me is really like structure.
Right.
Where both of my parents had difficult, challenging childhoods in which money was tight. There wasn't always emotional support. My dad joins the Army to get out of West Philly. My mom also joins the Army to get out of small town Arizona. And then I'm born in an Army base a couple years later as they meet. And so I think because of that incredibly like tough, rigid, structured thing, they were like, Chris, do whatever you want. Just like go have fun. Like, you don't have to have our childhood. Like go, you want to get a film degree, cool. Like you want to play music, go for it. But it's just so funny how like we always kind of want what we don't have. Where I was left feeling, I was like, you guys were in the Army. Can't you give me a little bit of structure in life?
Yeah, and I get the sense that it goes a little bit deeper, which is like, it probably speaks to you on a soul level of, don't you care? Don't you care enough to give me some parameters, or you're just going to let me do whatever the fuck you want because you don't care? Or let me do whatever the fuck I want because you don't care, would be my guess about how it hits you on a deeper level.
Yeah, I think every teenager wants to stay out till 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. And then when there's like no consequences and no one cares. So it's like, you're not even a little bit pissed off that I like was just out all night.
Totally. But thank you for sharing that. That's very vulnerable. I think having men share these things more and more is important. And I think Jayson does a great job of that too.
And it's interesting how we just, so much of these energetics come back to like overcompensating. So I'm sharing with you about lack of structure. So now I try to create structure and control, and my place is very tidy and clean and everything is organized. So it just feels like this oscillation, like back and forth and back and forth.
Yep. 100%. All right, buddy. I am sweating like it's a fucking sauna in here. I can see the sheen on my forehead. So
I didn't know it got hot in Canada.